Whereas Willie Sutton.
Again, everybody, good morning. You're listening to the lawmakers on Capitol Hill talking about a proposal being called it's essentially a wealth tax. The wealthiest Americans, the measure would impose a 2% annual tax on the net worth of U.S. households above $50 million and would add an additional 1% levy on households worth more than $1 billion. It was introduced, and we've been listening in on the latest right here on NewsNow from Fox. But currently joining us is Brandon Arnold. He is the Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union to kind of talk about this breakdown and the response and the reaction to it. Mr. Arnold, good morning. Thank you for joining us, and how are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
So what is your response when this proposal was unveiled by lawmakers? What was your initial reaction?
Well, this isn't anything new, so I wasn't surprised, certainly, to see this come from Elizabeth Warren and other progressives on Capitol Hill. It's something that was talked about during the presidential campaign when she was running for the Democratic nomination. But I got to tell you, this is a horrible tax. It's a lousy tax. It's popular in some circles because people think it's getting at the Bill Gates and Jeff Bezoses of the world. But in fact, it's such a broken and difficult to administer tax that the vast majority of European countries that have adopted this, 75% of the countries in Europe that have adopted this, have scrapped it. Not because they love billionaires all of a sudden, but because it's so difficult to administer and because it chases capital out of their countries and pushes it to other countries where it's used for job creation and productive economic purposes.
The numbers that we're talking about, the Ultra Millionaire Tax Act, and we're talking about billionaires. It's a lot of money, a lot of figures that most Americans don't make. So for those who think, why shouldn't we tax our wealthiest? What's your response to that?
Well, sure. The bottom threshold of this is $50 million. But the weird thing about this tax is it's not taxing income. It's not taxing investment earnings. What it's taxing is everything that you own. So your real estate, the stocks and bonds in your portfolio, cars, artwork. And that's what makes this tax so tricky and difficult. It's going to lead to a massive expansion in the bureaucracy as they're going to need to audit people to find out, do people hit that $50 million threshold or are they just below it? Do they have a family business that may be worth that much? Even if they're not sitting on millions and millions of dollars in their bank account, they may have farms, small businesses, other things that can add up quickly to $50 million. So the reach is going to be much beyond, again, the Jeff Bezoses and Bill Gates of the world. And what we're going to see is the biggest expansion in the size of the IRS in our nation's history, as well as full employment for people that are tax attorneys, accountants, and so forth. That's where you're going to see the biggest growth in this. Meanwhile, you're going to see a reduction in the amount of wealthy people. People like Michael Jordan, worth about $2 billion, would cease to be a billionaire in about 11 years under this tax, because it's a punitive tax that confiscates wealth and moves it from people's pockets to the federal treasury.
How does President Biden feel about the act?
Well, during the campaign, this was talked about a lot. And of course, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and some of the more progressive candidates were strong supporters of a wealth tax. Fortunately, Biden nor Kamala Harris ever got behind it. So I think that's a good sign, because if you want to punish the rich, if you want to take more of their earnings, this is not the way to do so. Again, all of these European countries scrapped it because countries like France lost 42,000 millionaires after adopting it. They had to get rid of it because their tax base was going away. And it wasn't just the wealth tax, it was their high income taxes and other taxes and regulations. We need a climate here in the United States that's hospitable for job creators and for people to start businesses, to grow businesses, and to generate economic activity here.
I feel like you're doing a really good job of breaking this down in common sense terms, letting our viewers know exactly what this is, how it will work. So if you wouldn't mind, can you please reiterate, if this act were to pass, the proposal, what would it require the IRS to do?
Well, first of all, the IRS is going to have to staff up like you've never seen before, because right now they've got the most similar tax that we have is the estate tax or death tax, and they process about 4,000 or so of these returns every single year. Here you're talking about 100,000 people that are going to be subject to the tax or be suspected of being subject to the tax. So the IRS is going to have to staff up tremendously. And who are they going to come for? They're going to come for anybody that's not just making billions of dollars, but is suspected of making billions of dollars or having billions of dollars in their stock portfolios or in real estate that may be in this country or abroad. So you're going to see the most audit-friendly IRS in our nation's history, the biggest IRS in our nation's history, as they go after anybody suspected of being extraordinarily wealthy. So it's going to be a huge mess. it would be something I think after a few years, people would be very, very frustrated with, because they're not going to be able to squeeze nearly as much money out of these billionaires as they think they would. That's it in a nutshell. I would say it's just a disaster. There's a reason why 75% of European countries have scrapped this tax.
Yeah, Mr. Arnold, apologies. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But obviously, Senator Elizabeth Warren, the most high-profile lawmaker at the news conference, breaking this down for everybody, essentially the proposal. We're hearing that she wants to use the money for Medicare for All and other programs, but it might not quite materialize like she projects, and eventually it would eliminate all billionaires. And so it's kind of the question of who will pay for the trillions of dollars in spending.
Yeah, that's the exact problem here. In fact, the tax rate, it starts at 2% and 3%, but if Medicare for All is adopted, the tax is automatically triggered under her bill to go up to 6%. But here's the problem. As people start to evade this tax, as they move their wealth overseas, as they relocate themselves overseas, and of course take small businesses and jobs and large businesses with them, the tax base shrinks. So you're able to tax less and less and less, not just from the estate tax, but also from other forms of taxes, the income tax, capital gains taxes, and so forth. So you're suddenly building out these huge expenditures in the form of Medicare for All and other programs, but you're reducing the amount over time of money the government's going to take. That creates a structural problem in imbalance, debt problems beyond what we've ever seen in this country.
So you're essentially believing that if this were to get a vote on Capitol Hill, it wouldn't pass?
I wouldn't put anything past this current Congress. I think it's an uphill battle for the Elizabeth Warrens of the world. But again, there are a lot of people that support this, because there is this, especially during the pandemic, this frustration with people who have grown wealthier during the pandemic, Jeff Bezos and others who have done quite well. And I think that frustration could ultimately lead to bad policy. That's why it's very, very important for people to get educated on this, to realize this isn't just raising our income taxes. This is creating a whole new tax structure that's very cumbersome and it's very problematic, that ultimately is going to shrink the size of our economy.
Mr. Arnold, is there anything else that you'd like to tell me about this while I have you?
Well, I'd just like to say, in France, one interesting thing they did, because wine, of course, is popular in France, they exempted French wine from this tax. So what did you see? All sorts of wealthy people invested their money in French wine. A similar thing happened in Ireland. They exempted artwork because it was so difficult to assess the value of artwork. So people bought up all sorts of artwork. So you see this attempt, these regulators trying to go after wealth, and they can't get to it because people are so creative and so responsive to all of these loopholes that are necessarily going to have to be created due to the problematic nature of the tax.
Apologies for that. Had a little audio issue. We really appreciate you joining us this morning here on NewsNow from Fox. This is Brandon Arnold, the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're taking